Hi, this is Brian from B's Music Shop, and I'm here with Ken Haas of Reverend Guitars.
I know I'm the one that brought up CNC machines. Mirr is not using any CNC machines. Everything is done on pin routers.
Really?
And yeah, and hand sanded. All of the contours are hand sanded. The binding, everything is applied by hand. Obviously, the binding is always applied by hand because it's binding, and a computer is not going to do this. So yeah, the necks are done by like Phil, the neck guy, which
honestly, that kind of blows my mind because your necks are so consistent that I just assumed it was a computer.
Us too.
I never knew that.
I have video. We sat and watched him shaping necks for a little while, and
I've had like 1,000 of your guitars, and I never knew that. I
turned to Penny and went like, "This guy's incredible. I hope he never gets hit by a bus."
Yeah, that will
because like that's like the guy. Oh yeah, this is him. He does all your necks, and we're like, really? Wow. You know, like it's incredible, but it's also a little scary. But it's kind of cool. I mean, there's belts going through the air, and he puts the neck up against a belt, and he has a pad that he holds the belt, and he presses the belt down to it as the belt is moving. Yeah, that's how it's done, man. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so
I've been in a lot of guitar plants, and I
basically
that's awesome.
Going to Mirr was like going back to Leo's place in 1955.
Yeah,
I mean that was really where it was at, and I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that, other than probably long run it's not sustainable. But watching him do it was, and so there's this thing. There's
how many
this,
does he crank out in like a day?
Not many.
I
mean, you know, we're limited to what we're limited to what we can do there. Yeah, they don't get that many on today.
So yeah, so you went to Mirr for the first time because, like, you had never
summer
been to
of 2022.
Yeah, it's been recent since COVID. Yeah,
and it was like I said, it was fascinating. To see everything being done by hand was interesting and a little scary. It brought home some of the inconsistencies that we see in our finishes because of the things that we spec from them. Like anybody who's watched me do any of this stuff knows I've said this a million times, but we very purposely use a very, very thin, tell them to use a very thin coat of sealer. Yeah. And then keep the paint and the clear coat thin. So there's a lot of times with the Carina where the sealer melts into the Carina. And then, of course, the color coat and the clear coat will do the same thing. So you can see the wood grain pattern on the top of the guitar. Yeah. And a lot of guitars in our price range and more expensive, and a lot of guitars cheaper than ours, I mean, they basically dip the bodies in sealer, sand them perfectly flat, which is a thing. And you get this perfectly pristine looking finish, high-end looking finish on the guitar. But I think that you've buried the wood at that point. And you end up with something that's heavier. You end up with something that feels more plasticky.
And that's a big complaint about urethane is that it's such a thick coat, and they do it. So that's usually the chief complaint about it against nitrocellulose is that they put it on too thick.
So because we put it on thin, there's little inconsistencies in the binding, and there's anomalies that happen because of that. And so it's because we've specified one thing that we end up with this other thing, right? Yeah. And we can't fight that. So I just tell, in what we're doing, that's how we want it done. And watching Mirr's process, I see why that happens. Yeah. And I don't think it's worth giving up their process in order to address this thing that to me doesn't have anything to do with playing guitar. Yes. And I am all for people collecting guitars. I have a couple. Yeah. Back to what I was talking about guitar finishes.
Guitar finishes.
I want to make guitars for collectors too, don't get me wrong. And we strive constantly to always have the finished stuff be better. But there's always been a thing with our line where they just feel good. Yeah. Absolutely. They just feel different. And I'm not dissing any of my competitors because I obviously love my competitors' guitars. Don't get me wrong. But there's a thing that's going on with our brand where people play them all the time and they're like, man, this thing it just feels like it's already broken into my hands. That's one thing people say. Or people say, it feels like a vintage instrument. It's brand new. Or variations on that. And I've always wondered why that is, because I feel the same way. I picked up your HPP over there. Yeah. And the neck on that HPP, that rosewood neck, I was like, oh, this is great, you know? And it's rolled. Yeah. The edges are rolled right. And it's just fantastic. I've always kind of wondered, so what is the specific trait? What is the specific characteristic about our guitars that make people say that?
Yeah.
Versus a new Les Paul or a new whatever we're competing against in whatever market range. And then when we went to Mirr, I was like, oh, it's not any one thing. It's all of this.
Yeah.
It's these 40 people at these workstations all doing this stuff and and I think that somehow when you pick up one of our guitars, you can feel that.
Yeah.
And Penny and I have been effectively trying to put that into words for the last year and a half, you know, and it's tricky because I don't want to sound patronizing and I don't want to sound like I'm insulting what other people are doing. I just think that they're doing it right. We are able to tap into this sort of old school way of manufacturing, and that might be the only factory that is still making guitars like that on a production basis. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I understand that there's guys that are making $5,000 guitars like that, or whatever. I get it.
I know people who switched away from pin routers in the last 10 or 15 years and that are, I mean,
and again, I don't
there's
have
nothing wrong. I mean, every vintage
I know, I'm not either.
That's
I'm not saying that that's bad, you know. Yeah.